As summer approached, my friends and I were looking forward to a carefree season filled with fun and plenty of time outdoors. Then Megan announced that she was hosting a costume party with an unusual rule. Instead of choosing our own outfits, everyone would draw a slip of paper from a basket to discover what they had to wear. When my turn came, I unfolded my paper and stared at it in disbelief. Bride. Megan had already explained that the costumes came in pairs: Superman and Lois Lane, Prince and Cinderella, and so on. When she announced groom, Tyler stepped forward. He was considerably taller and broader than me, making the situation even more embarrassing. I quickly became the target of some harmless teasing. Tyler even threw an arm around my shoulders and joked that we'd make a perfect wedding couple. When I got home, I told Mom about the costume. She laughed at first, but then became thoughtful. "I still have an old wedding dress," she said. "Though I doubt it would fit. Your Aunt Susan works in women's clothing. Maybe she can help." The next morning, Mom took me to the store to meet Susan. I had imagined the whole thing would be simple: a dress, perhaps a wig, and then I'd be done. I soon discovered that I had seriously underestimated the situation. Susan introduced us to Margaret, a rather intimidating employee who immediately treated the assignment like a professional project. She examined the costume requirements, took my measurements, and began discussing what would be needed to make the outfit convincing. Before long, I was standing in the bridal section while the women compared dresses and accessories. Margaret eventually returned with a white satin and lace gown and helped Mom make the necessary adjustments. Looking at myself in the mirror was surreal. I had expected to look ridiculous, yet the costume was surprisingly convincing. That realization did not make me feel any better. Susan and Mom began discussing the remaining details: hair, makeup, shoes, and accessories. I could tell from their expressions that they were taking this far more seriously than I was. When we returned home, I assumed the ordeal was finished. Instead, Mom announced that I would need to practice wearing the outfit before the party. A week. I protested. "You're going to be playing the bride," she replied. "You should at least be comfortable enough to walk and move around without looking completely lost." There was little point arguing. Once Mom made up her mind, changing it was practically impossible. She helped me prepare the costume and arranged for my hair and makeup to be styled before the party. When everything was finished, I barely recognized the person staring back at me from the mirror. Mom studied the result for a moment. "We need a name for your character," she declared. She suggested Riley, and before I could think of anything better, the name stuck. Then came an unexpected complication. Mom checked the instructions for one of the costume accessories and discovered that removing it immediately could be unsafe. That meant the costume preparations would have to remain in place longer than originally planned. I stared at her. "You're telling me I have to keep doing this?" "For a few more days," she admitted. Megan eventually learned what had happened and was fascinated by the whole situation. She suggested that we go shopping for clothes that would work better with the character. I protested, insisting that I could manage with my normal clothes, but Mom and Megan were determined. The shopping trip was embarrassing enough without the two of them enthusiastically debating what Riley should wear. By the time we left the store, I had several new outfits and shoes. Mom then insisted that I practice putting everything together properly so I wouldn't struggle at the party. Later that afternoon, Aunt Susan arrived with another announcement. "I've arranged a salon appointment for Saturday morning," she said. "That will give us plenty of time to get everything ready." "Wonderful," I muttered sarcastically. She completely ignored my tone. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying not to think about the upcoming party. Every time I caught my reflection, however, I was reminded of how completely different the character looked from the person I was used to seeing. Then the doorbell rang. Mom answered it, and a moment later Tyler walked inside. His face immediately brightened when he saw me. "Megan wasn't exaggerating," he said. "You really do look the part." I groaned. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see my bride, of course." Before I could respond, Tyler suggested that we spend some time together before the party so we'd be more comfortable as the assigned bride and groom. Mom immediately approved of the idea. I wanted to refuse, but everyone was already looking at me expectantly. Tyler held out his hand. Reluctantly, I accepted. As we headed toward his car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this ridiculous costume party had somehow become far more complicated than I ever imagined. At first, I was desperate to return to my normal life. Yet after several days of wearing dresses and skirts, I had to admit that it wasn't nearly as difficult as I'd imagined. In fact, I was beginning to feel surprisingly comfortable with the appearance everyone had started associating with Riley. With 10 days still ahead of me, I wondered whether fighting the situation was worth the trouble. Perhaps it would be easier simply to accept the role until everything was over. Tyler seemed especially interested in spending time with me. He invited me to dinner, and throughout the evening he treated Riley almost like a completely different person. I was uncomfortable with the attention, especially because I knew he understood who I really was beneath the costume. After dinner, I returned home with plenty to think about. Tyler began calling regularly, but I avoided meeting him. I couldn't explain my feelings to Mom, so I kept most of them to myself. The following days passed without any major incidents. I continued wearing feminine clothes and gradually became better at doing my own makeup. I still told myself it was only temporary, but each day the character of Riley seemed a little less unfamiliar. Saturday brought another appointment at the salon. Mom, Aunt Susan, and I arrived in the morning, and I was introduced to Debbie, who had been given detailed instructions about my makeover. Everything about the visit felt more elaborate than I had expected. My hair was washed and styled, my eyebrows were shaped, and my nails were carefully prepared. Makeup was applied, and eventually my hair was arranged with decorative accessories. When Debbie finally turned the chair toward the mirror, I was stunned. The person staring back at me looked completely different. The carefully styled hair, polished nails, makeup, and elegant accessories had transformed the costume into something far more convincing than I had imagined possible. For the first time, I caught myself thinking that Riley actually looked good. That realization confused me. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe being Riley wasn't as terrible as I had originally believed. Maybe I could simply enjoy the experience while it lasted. Once home, Mom and Aunt Susan helped me prepare for the party. The wedding dress, shoes, jewelry, and other accessories were all carefully arranged. By the time everything was finished, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized myself. Aunt Susan smiled. "You look wonderful, Riley." I wasn't sure whether to agree, but deep down I knew she was right. Soon there was a knock at the door. Tyler had arrived wearing a formal tuxedo. When he saw me, his expression immediately changed to one of complete surprise. Mom insisted on taking several photographs before we left. Tyler then led me outside, where a limousine was waiting. The ride to Megan's house felt strangely unreal. When we arrived, I discovered that the party wasn't quite what I'd expected. Nearly everyone was dressed formally. The boys were wearing tuxedos, while the girls were dressed as though they were attending an actual wedding. Then I understood. Megan had transformed the entire costume party into a mock wedding, with Tyler and me as the central couple. As we entered the house, everyone applauded. The girls immediately surrounded me, complimenting my outfit, hairstyle, and overall appearance. Their enthusiasm was both flattering and embarrassing. Before I had much time to recover, the ceremony began. I was escorted toward the makeshift altar with a bouquet in my hands. Everyone watched as I slowly walked toward Tyler. Megan stood at the front and began her playful wedding ceremony. The whole thing was obviously meant to be a joke, but the attention made it feel strangely serious. When she asked whether I accepted Tyler as my partner for the evening, I hesitated for only a moment before answering. "I do." Everyone cheered. The ceremony ended with Tyler and me officially declared the party's bride and groom. I couldn't help laughing at the absurdity of the situation. Afterward, the girls took me upstairs so I could change out of the elaborate wedding gown. Megan had prepared another dress for me, one that was easier to move around in. Once I changed, we returned to the party. The rest of the evening became surprisingly enjoyable. I danced with several friends, talked with people I normally wouldn't have expected to approach me, and gradually stopped worrying about how strange the entire situation was. For one night, everyone simply accepted Riley. Eventually, it was time to leave. As Tyler escorted me outside, I couldn't help wondering what would happen when the costume came off and ordinary life returned. That night marked the beginning of a much bigger change than I had anticipated. For a while, I returned to wearing my usual clothes and tried to forget about Riley. But something felt missing. I found myself thinking about the dresses, the salon, the party, and the confidence I'd unexpectedly discovered. Eventually, even Mom noticed that I wasn't quite myself. One afternoon at the mall, I caught myself staring at the dresses and women's clothing in the shop windows. Mom noticed but didn't say anything until we returned home. Then she finally asked whether I wanted to bring Riley back. I spent the entire day thinking about it. The next morning, I made my decision. When I came downstairs, Riley was back. This time, however, it wasn't because someone had told me to dress that way. It was my choice. I visited Megan and told her that I intended to keep the Riley identity rather than treating it as a temporary costume. She was surprised but supportive. Over the following weeks, I gradually became more comfortable with the person I was becoming. What had started as an embarrassing party assignment had forced me to question assumptions I'd never really examined. Eventually, I realized that I didn't need to treat Riley as a joke or a temporary character. I could decide for myself what parts of the experience mattered to me. Looking back, the strange costume party had given me something I never expected: the confidence to understand myself better and make my own choices. Sometimes life takes an unexpected turn, and you discover that the path you never planned to follow may teach you more about yourself than the one you originally chose.